Uh, Thank you so much, Yuliya, for this really fantastic and interesting and unique project. I think that it is very important, right? And that you have this really productive lens on society right now, and I look forward to seeing what you'll do with it. So I have a couple of questions for you. One is and you say this a little bit more in the paper, that this is a boom, and it's a recent boom, right? And I wonder if you can speculate a bit on what caused that boom, right? It's always difficult to talk about art and cause and what causes art, but if you could think about what caused it both in terms of the images and in terms of institution. I mean, how do you suddenly have 100,000 people going to Comic-Con, right? So what caused this boom?
I think it was a cumulative effect. I mean, all these comic books appearing in the late 90s and early 2000s, translating books and blogs and everything else existed before, but then when it was institutionalized, it gave all these people the opportunity to somehow express their interest more clearly, yeah, and more open, and that actually gave them this cultural space. And also about the book production, right? As it's developing, and now they have more, like for example, the book selling network develops, and so they have actually the spaces where for the book distribution, right? Because these are very actually costly books, because most of them they are graphic novels, which is like thick book with a few text, but really great quality of print, and not really they're costly, right? And what else?
But just on that note, so you say the institutionalization of this. So who's paying for printing these beautiful comics, and who's buying them, and what Wydawnictwa are doing them?
There's basically two of them. One is Nebeski, who printed the Hopak and others, and the other one is Asgardian Comics. And they're based in Kiev, and for example, Comic-Con, I think it was crowdfunded on Big Idea, I think. That was most of the funding. And yes, these artists, it's like a cooperation of them, right? Collaboration. And so they funded this, these publishing houses precisely for their projects. And a lot of them, for example, this year, this Dahopak project went to Frankfurt to represent Ukrainian book production at all, and it is very successful there, and it's very successful in Ukraine as well. And they also say about the success in diaspora, because comics, and especially this kind of comics, they help the younger generation, the children, which don't really read much, to start to do it, because they are so interested in the content, and these are the books that actually attract them to maybe this cultural practice at all. Yeah.
Okay, so on that note, can you talk a little bit about the genre of the comic book and graphic novel? Because it's always seemed to me that at least Comic-Con in the United States is very much about TV and film characters, right? And less about comic books. Right, and so, and you mentioned some of these comic books are going to have lives as films,
yes,
right? So they will have film lives. So is this world of Ukrainian comics, people who make it, people who buy it, people supporting crowdfunding to go to Comic-Con, are they people exclusively about comics as a graphic novel? Is there any connection with wider mass media?
I think, okay, I'll start there. Most of these books are positioned as graphic novels and following the tradition of graphic novels like The Mouse or Persepolis, to be able to speak about more serious subjects. And I think this coming out of these comic lovers and everything in the form of a Comic-Con was just the ground for this kind of product to be sort of placed in that in that shape, right? Because I agree with you that it's kind of different. Yes, for example, for Ukraine, the translated comics and which was all about the Superman and that kind of Marvel comics kind of thing, was kind of different. But since this platform already is created, it gives the opportunity to artists like this to add to it, right? And because they are working in the same medium, in the same form.
Okay, great. So I actually want to continue on that note about the content of the comics, right? So I think it's so interesting you mentioned Art Spiegelman's Mouse, which if anyone doesn't know is a comic graphic novel about the Holocaust and about Art Spiegelman talking about his father's experience in the Holocaust. And it's about talking about a very difficult moment in history in this sort of comic form. And I think it seems that there's several different kinds of contents here, right? That to what extent are these comics really grappling with a difficult past, the way that Spiegelman does, and to what extent are they comic novels using what you have as your palette, right? And the Cossack is something that you have on your palette of things to use in art, and so you use it. I mean, to what extent are these really about investigating a Cossack past, and to what extent just using the Cossack because that's something that these artists sort of have at their fingertips to use?
I think dealing with past would be more, well, not maybe in Art Spiegelman's form, but towards that would be more this Heroi po nevoli and maybe the Vola project. But the Cossacks are, I think they are speaking to a little bit different thing. They are creating this again, or recreating, or speaking about the image of the hero, or like really masculine hero and but patriotic hero. And to my mind, it's quite symptomatic that they appear now. Well, I said the first book, of course, 2012, but then 14, 16. You have it. You have this need for a new hero in the popular culture, and because you have the news that tell you about events from the war every day, and then it was in my mind that could be some kind of a response from the popular culture in this form. And also, I think what might be dealing with difficult past is these comics based on Ato stories, because most of them are now based on like actual stories. It's like a testimony. For example, this one is called Cyborgs, and this is the story of three friends that were in the cyborgs in the airport of Donetsk during the period that it was attacked. And also this one, it was Savur Mohila. I think we saw Savur Mohila yesterday in Anthony's movie, and it was created by some artists that have been already in Ato, and they tell their stories. So now it's more like a documenting the very recent past, and if they move in this direction, maybe later they can conceptualize it more like that. Yes, thank you for the question very much.
Yeah, great. I just have one more question. You talk a lot in your paper about post-colonial theory and this sort of idea of a post-colony. And you have this great line, public culture as a condition of modernity in the post-colony. And so it seems like you're talking about how comics are public culture, and that you need that somehow to get out of a colonial mindset. Is that your argument?
I'm quoting Arjun Apardrai there,
yeah.
Right? And he speaks about this modernity as or modernization as a way of exiting of colonial condition, let's say. And for me, why it was important to use his work is because he's talking about this post-colonial visuality, which is more like generalized. He speaks about it as a space which is filled with this nomad, right? No images, but they are nevertheless they are nomad and they are not attached to any specific location or culture. They are legible by all, and to me it seemed like these comics and these kind of books and the creating, shaping of these heroes is the attempt to enter that space and to bring something which would be also legible by others. And in many of the interviews, these artists say that it was important for us to insert a Ukrainian hero into the world pantheon, right? Like where you have the cowboy of the Wild West and you have the ninja or Japanese samurai, and it was important for us to have a Cossack also there. And it's, yeah, like that. Did I answer the question?
That's great. I think there's a lot out there. So questions? Yeah, Jennifer. Oh my goodness. Okay, just keep your hands up for a sec.
So I'll be very brief then. So my question, this is great, and in my understanding and my personal reading of different materials like this, I've come across a lot of writing about how history is put into textbooks, and I'm thinking specifically of like Anna Frenia's work, things like that. And so I know this is a very complex question, but I would be interested to hear more on your sense of how textbooks and comic books circulate differently or function differently as part of the ideological apparatus. They're both doing narrative work, but they're not the same. How are they not?
This is a very great question. Thank you. In the first place, what falls to my mind is the textbooks are the things that you are exposed to. You don't have any choice if you whether you use them or not, right? In school, you're given some, you're exposed to this program, right? Whereas these things are by choice, and they are accessible under very different conditions, and they are more desirable, right? They speak to some to your imagination, what you imagine of yourself, and maybe that would be also this the way for the for your thinkings of history and maybe this horizontation of history to enter this your imaginary, right? I don't know if it would be a good thing or a bad thing, but maybe that's the way to think about it.
Tamara.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I would like to know more about gendered images and gender relationships in your comics, especially on those on Cossacks. What are, could you say, as more typical scenarios? Is it more, we could say, traditional gender nation relationships of this prince and princess with more normative masculinity and with emphasized femininity? Or where women are victim of those who are waiting for some prince or Cossack? Or there are more, I would say, diverse scenarios where femininity or women are also more involved in some, you know, in searching for something in life. So I would like to know more.
Yeah, I didn't show any of the female characters, but doesn't speak to my being framed, but not about these comics. There is the main protagonist in Danyliw. She is Japanese, and she is the girl ninja. But also, and she is very good at that. She is a bodyguard, but they also mentioned that she got so great in this martial art because she has been practicing in the kitchen for a while. So actually, and she's portrayed with all these kitchen utensils, like practicing this martial art and stuff. Yes, but so I would say there is a lot of things that you're saying, this normative, which speak to this normative masculinity. Beside her, it's quite polarized. So the girls are mostly like mothers and not victims, but they play more passive roles, and they're not waiting. Well, not waiting for the Cossack, but Cossack in a way, they play this helpful role, protecting their children and stuff like this. So it's more polarized.
Yes.
Thank you. Try to imagine how much I enjoyed your presentation. You probably heard that I started talking about this topic yesterday. Was it yesterday about the corruption and what we had over at our Department of Agriculture and our Frank magazine? Well, I just want to tell you that I want to take you back to 1975, my first trip to Ukraine. It was under Soviet times, and I couldn't understand how this country existed then and how it's existed till now. You know, and now it clicked in my mind, there's two things that save this country and keep it going. One is prayer, and two is humor and satire and cynicism. And that has been a good lesson for me, because I think it came into me, and it was also what saved me when I was working over in what I call the dung pile of our bureaucracy, the Department of Agriculture as it was then. And I see that this is what sustained Ukrainians and people in the Soviet Union in what was the dung pile, the Soviet Union. So if I can, I really appreciate that. And also I have a copy of a satire paddocks that I bought in 1975 somewhere in a bookstore in Ukraine. And I always remember one cartoon from there.
We have a lot of questions.
Yeah, yes, okay. Is where there's a Cossack dressed in two boots, and they call it Dva chobit para. On one chobit was trezub, on the other chobit was swastika. And also, I always refer to that and always say Dva chobit para, or birds of a feather flock together. Thank you for your presentation.
Okay, great. Anthony.
Kind of question in two parts, maybe. Yeah, this is really, really interesting. I'd done some previous work in Kosovo using where traumatized kids would make comics, you know, using Comic Life. They would take photos, and so that they would be able to explain their world to each other. And I'm just wondering, sort of picking up maybe from the sort of art discussion earlier, that this seems to be a way to kind of get out a lot of stuff that's in the zeitgeist or people worry about, and sort of put it down as a sort of form of expression. And well, it's sort of great for sort of building up the sort of national mythology and so on. And I'm just wondering about, is there something similar going on in the occupied territories? Is there something going on in Russia? I mean, are people making similar heroes of, Apolchensi, or heroes of Zelyony Chereviki? And wouldn't it be awesome to kind of get these guys together in a conference? And to almost make a kind of meta comic on these guys interacting and talking, as a way to do a piece of reconciliation, maybe. Anyway,
I think that would be awesome.
Yeah, thank you for this reconciliation project. I'm sorry I cannot answer this question because I don't know what's going on at the occupied territories. But what I do know is that in Russia the culture of comics is very widely spread, and they really produce a lot of their own products, and also publish and translate a lot of Western comics. And it wouldn't be surprising if they already had something like this, but I didn't get my hands on that yet. Thank you for this project as well.
Boris.
Just a quick comment on the nature of American and Ukrainian superheroes. American superheroes come from outside, they come from space, or else they're alienated youth that have been bitten by radioactive spiders. They almost invariably act alone or as part of alienated groups, and they tend to hide themselves in society when not being superheroes. Ukrainian superheroes seem to be very deeply rooted in Ukrainian history, in Ukrainian society, at least on a popular level, and they seem to operate as parts of groups, or at least lead groups, rather than individually, from what I can see.
Yes, that's true.
I don't know how to make this into a question, but could you comment on, does this tell us something about the social psychology or the need of Ukrainians versus Americans?
Well, I wouldn't try now to compare Ukrainian society and the American society, but maybe it has something to do with the historical moment when they are produced, and where this moment of unity and of help came to the table, and you hear about the necessity of cooperation so much, and when you look for partners and everything all the time and look for support, maybe that would be part of the answer why it comes in artistic form like this. And then it is always a cooperation between those Cossacks, as we've seen in the beginning. There's a team of 3 working together. Also, these ATO soldiers always empathizing this notion of friendship and kinship and mutual help, and why is it so important for them? Maybe there is a part of answer there. Maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the comparative aspect can be really productive, because I also think American comics start a lot in the Great Depression, and it is actually about ordinary people, right? Ordinary people can get superpowers, right? And so are Cossacks ordinary people? I mean, I don't know, that's something just to think about. Jesse.
I've attended Comic-Con 5 times. I'm from San Diego. I love this project. Thank you so much for being you. Yeah, here. Thank you for doing this. So I have a comment and then a question, and it's similar to Anthony's. So the comment is that I'd like to know more, and I hope that as you put this into a book project, you write more about the art form of comics compared not to comics in the United States and comics in Ukraine, because I think that that's not holding a lot constant. They're really different markets. But the difference between comics as an art and genre form and other kinds of popular culture production. So there's 2 big differences that are relevant, and maybe a third. One big one is that it's cheap. And what that functionally means is that the economies of scale of making a comic are such that 3 people can do it, or in the limit 1 person can do it, right? Like in the limit, just Alan Moore can sit there and make a comic. And that's not really right. It usually takes 2 or 3. But contra the Avengers movie, which takes literally thousands, tens of thousands of people to make. So, it's possible to have an artisanal approach to a comic where you just sit in your basement and make it. And it strikes me that actually has implications. So even though Russia's capital poor, Russia could compete in this space. If you have, with Anthony's question, it's possible to imagine a lot of pro-Russian artists, maybe not in the DNR, but Russia's a big place. So you could imagine like a Gromskian war of position with, hegemonic and counter-hegemonic narratives in the comic book genre in a way that would be harder with movies. Because with movies, they find themselves competing with Hollywood, but with comics, they don't. With comics, ultimately, you're limited by this, the IP is really fluid. There are some forms that all look the same. I'm sure that you can talk about that. The other difference is that you have these white cells where you put text, and so it's easy to translate them across language spaces. So my question is there an effort to move beyond the Ukrainian language market to the English language market, which is much bigger, right? Like if you could move this, because you're holding all of the really, really difficult, I can see the battle for Ukraine is up there in English.
Yeah, it is. This, I think, is the same comic. They published it in 2 languages right away to do precisely
English and Ukrainian?
Yes.
But not Russian and Ukrainian?
No.
Huh.
Yeah, they are trying to reach the English, the readership, yes, prior to the Russian-speaking one. No, I've not heard of any attempts. Thank you.
Well, that's too bad, because there's a lot of Russians that live in Ukraine.
They mostly read Ukrainian. Yeah.
Okay. So we have a question here.
Well, we have compared and contrasted the American and Ukrainian comic traditions. Could you compare and contrast the Ukrainian tradition with that of another country famous for its comics, namely Belgium? There's a long tradition there with the Tintin series and later Bakhtiani and Yoko Tsuno and all these other comics. So go for it.
This is a very tough one. Thank you for this question. But I don't think that Belgian tradition was of a greater influence in Ukraine. they go more. They speak more about Japanese. It's more popular, and yes, in the manga, and also some French. It was published in Ukraine. Some French comics also in the 90s they appeared. But Belgian, that's a tough one. I cannot answer that yet. But thank you very much for that. I will look for an opportunity.
Our last question, Ina.
In your presentation, you show us how new heroes were introduced into Ukrainian comics. My question is about anti-heroes. Can you elaborate more about the developments in the anti-heroes scene? Thank you.
And the anti-heroes, thank you, Ina, for this question, are also very traditional. For example, for Cossacks, the anti-heroes would be Ottomans and Ottoman sultans, and also the Polish nobility. And then for the Ato, it's very interesting because, for example, in the comic that I showed only briefly in the beginning, there are the Ukrainian superheroes are fighting with Dvorli, which is very fantastic creatures with which have two heads of an eagle, right, like in Russian coat of arms. And they are also fighting these bugs that we all remember, the Colorado bugs, which became really. What's the correct English name of that? Yeah, they are. Because of this pattern on the bug, it looks sort of like the symbolic of the Russian Saint George's stripe, right? And so these are the villains, and yeah, pretty much like that. But for Cossacks, it's very traditional: the Ottoman sultans and the Polish nobility.
I'm just going to ask one final question about who in Kiev and in Ukraine, who are the readers of these comics, and who is going to Comic-Con? What is their sort of social background? Are they Jesse's age, right? Are they young kids? Like who is part of this boom?
There was a big, there is a big movement in Ukraine of historical reconstructionists, right? And these are mostly the people who go to the Comic-Con. Somehow, yes, historical reenactors. Yes, and I think it's all of the ages. What you can see, I have not been to this Comic-Con, but what you see at the pictures is that people of all of the ages, and also the readers of the comics, also of every age, because it was more of the parents buying these books for their kids and ending up reading these books themselves. So it's like they can speak to any age. Yes.
And where can we buy these comic books?
It was actually first I had an idea to bring them here, but they are really expensive, and that stopped me from bringing them here. But I can send, I think, to the university some of them.
Definitely. Well, I think there's still so much I want to ask, but I know we all want a coffee break. So let's give a big round of applause to Yuliya.